Guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is the show where I review all the comics I've read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between, and before I get started, I do talk about the viewer's pick of the week at the end of the video, so in the comments below, let me know your pick of the week for a chance to be featured on the episode. Let's jump in. I had a pretty average smallish haul this week with 9 comics, and number 9 for me is Batman and Robin issue 9, a book I want to love because it's pretty much the same creative team as the Robin series, and I love the Robin series. I think it really got a journey for Damian that we hadn't seen before, and adding Batman, it almost feels like an editorial reasoning, and it just doesn't mesh. The Man-Bat story with Batman just makes the school story feel silly, and the tone feels really off, and they're trying to bleed these two things together that just don't work. And I feel like the artwork is not as strong when it comes to the Damian stories compared to the Batman stories, and it just doesn't feel like the same book. So for me, that is 2 stars, and that is number 9. Moving on to number 8, a book I got on whim just because it was a small haul, and that is Blood Hunt, Amazing Spider-Man issue 1. The reason I say I got this on whim is because I did not like the tie-in for Amazing Spider-Man, so I'm like, oh, do I need the Blood Hunt miniseries? But I love Spider-Man, so I'm like, alright, why not? Not getting a lot of books, I'll try out issue 1, and it's pretty much what you would expect. If you are really enjoying Blood Hunt, which I think is very hard to tell because there's only one issue, or if you're excited for the vampire side of Marvel, get this issue. If you're looking for something that progresses Spider-Man stories or feels necessary to Spider-Man story, I don't recommend this one. The artwork is solid enough. It's a cool, darker story. You got the Daughters of the Dragon, Lizard, and of course Morbius, because you wouldn't have a vampire story without Morbius. But there's nothing here that really does it for me. It just doesn't feel like a necessary story. It doesn't feel like it needs to tie into Blood Hunt, and I'm still very, very curious why Blood Hunt is an event in general. So the artwork is fine. There's some interesting characters. Like I said, you don't get to see the Daughters of the Dragon very often, so that was cool, but not enough for me to want to get that next issue. So overall, giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 8. Moving on to number 7, a book I also got on whim because I did not have a lot of books this week, and that is Doom issue 1. I am not usually a Hickman fan, but I've been enjoying his Ultimate Spider-Man just like the rest of us, so I'm like, you know what, maybe I'm giving Hickman a bad rap. Let's go see what Doom's about. This definitely feels like it's gonna be a bigger deal in the future, but it's very much exposition about, well, this is what happened in the past, this is what's gonna happen, this is how Doom was hurt, and how that's connected to Galactus, all through Valeria's point of view. So for me, it wasn't the most interesting thing just because it was so heavy on exposition instead of just more pure emotion, but the art was really good. I really loved the action. I enjoyed the stylized look of it. I feel like it was very distinct, which is why this was a bit higher. And also I could admit that just because the story isn't for me, it doesn't mean it's a bad cosmic story, and it doesn't mean that this isn't gonna affect things in the future, which is why it's a little easier to put this a bit higher. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 7. Moving on to number 6, the title of this video, Ultimate X-Men issue 3. So this is actually the debut of Nico. I'm a huge Nico fan, so I was very excited for this. But, you know, I continue to have the same problem I've had with issue 1 and 2. It's very, very slow. It very much is written like a manga, which is not a bad thing. You know, mangas have really great stories, but what manga has, at least for me as an American audience, a lot of times it's written for that book, right? It is released through those magazines where you get chapter by chapter, but it is definitely released more for the book than anything. It's not the storytelling is not like comics in the regard of like we're trying to release this issue by issue. Every issue should have this like beginning, middle, and end, but it is more released for the trade, we'll call it, for manga. And it definitely feels like that for this too, where it's just very slow, and even when they are releasing information, it just doesn't feel like it has that oomph, like that new character, you get a little bit of her origins, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting, I guess. And then Nico is very, very different in this book, where she's almost a sassy girl, and the thing that does make me want to read more, though, is the ending where she's like, oh, all three of us are mutants, because finally the word is being said. After 3 issues, this is an X-Men book, and it's taken 3 issues for the word mutant to be said. So I'm like, okay, I want to see what their dynamic's going to be, because they do feel like very odd characters to pair. And again, will Nico have anything that's, and I just hit my mic, so I'm sorry about that, but will Nico have any familiarity of what we know her from Runaways? So we do see that her parents are psychics or something like that, so they're definitely trying to, I guess, tie in a little bit to Nico's family from the Runaways comic, that they also have powers. So that's interesting. I want to stick with it. I'll give it a couple more issues, but I do still feel like this is very slow. But yes, to answer the question, Nico does make this book a little better, because it does bring some intrigue to the book, where I'm like, okay, here's another layer that could be interesting. So giving that 3 stars, and that is number 6. Moving on to number 5, which is Action Comics issue 1065. I've been enjoying this event where we get to see our heroes trapped by Brainiac. Superman's teaming up with Lobo. I will say Superman teaming up with Lobo was probably a thing I enjoyed the least, but I think it led into a really interesting standpoint where we get to see Lobo, of course, turns on Superman, and Superman's gonna have to fight multiple people in the next issue. But then I also really liked the Supergirl and Superboy story, where they obviously are trying to save their family, save themselves, and get out of Brainiac's reach, all while having to team up with people they don't want to, like Livewire. So I had a fun time with this. I also really love the art. I think it's dark, but not too dark. It just really fits for this story very well. So I've been enjoying this event, and I thought it was a pretty solid issue. So giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 5. Moving on to number 4, which is Dark Ride issue 12, is the last issue of Dark Ride, which is probably the reason why this is a little lower. It doesn't necessarily feel like a last issue, even though I think they try to wrap up everything they can. It does feel a little rushed, honestly, at least elements of it. I think the overall scope was really fun and interesting, where you get to see who takes over Devil Land, how does this affect the father, how does that affect the family. But as you get to the end, you get this moment where our main character, the guy, he just wants to reconnect to his family, which is a great ending, and it kind of leaves you hanging ending, but it never builds to be like, wow, this might happen, this might not happen, where I feel like it was a choice to leave it open. Like, I feel like there just was more story to tell. It didn't feel like an artistic choice to me. And then, honestly, the thing I was probably a bit more disappointed with is the Halloween and the other girl. The other girl feels like she's just been strung along the whole entire time, and her arc really doesn't end. She doesn't get to really deal with the loss of her brother in longing way. They kind of pair these two up in the end, where I'm like, oh, are they gonna have a thing? Like, it just kind of felt too open-ended ending, in my opinion. So I just wanted to see more, but the stuff I did see, I enjoyed. I liked seeing the dad go down in shambles. I liked seeing where Devil Land was going. It just does feel like, oh, it's setting up to a new volume, and the end of the book is like, nah, this is kind of what we planned for. So overall, giving it 3.5 stars. Still love this series, still recommend this series. I just thought it went a little bit out on a whimper. Moving on to number 3, a book I was really pleasantly surprised by, and that's Miss Marvel Mutant Menace, issue 3. I was not sure how to feel about the Red Dagger stuff, because I'm not really a fan of that relationship. It does feel a little forced to me, and it still does. But even with all that, I enjoyed the character work that was being told with Miss Marvel, especially her going up against these zombie X-Men. And the cliffhanger was really strong, where we get to see the Inhumans return. So you're like, okay, well, Miss Marvel's a mutant now. Are they going to explain her Inhuman connections and what that's all about? Also, the art was crisp. Again, there were some good character moments between her and Red Dagger, even if I don't agree with all of them. And there was good action overlaid with some really strong plot. So I just thought this was a really solid issue. So overall, giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 3. Moving on to number 2, the book I'm always excited to read, and that is Green Lantern issue 9. And this was a really, really solid issue. I'm sorry, issue 11 we're already up to. This was solid because we get to see Carol become a Star Sapphire again, or at least lead into her becoming a Star Sapphire, as she's just like, I guess I'm gonna marry this guy, because why the hell not? Who's not Hal? and you get to see this big flashback of why she cares about Hal. The ending being like, okay, what are you going to choose? Are you going to choose Hal, or are you going to choose this guy? But most importantly, are you going to choose to be a hero again? Which we don't really know why she left being a Star Sapphire, so I'm kind of curious to see where that goes in the next issue. But also the Green Lantern stuff was really interesting, as we get to see this villain honestly do some villainous things as he's attacking the power sources of all the different spectrums of the Lanterns, especially the opening, which connects to Carol being the Star Sapphires. So I just thought it was a really solid issue. It just continues to be one of my favorite books, because I just feel like it does such a good job at the soap opera moments, but then also, the artwork is always so super crisp, and then the plot moves really well, where it's tackling things we've seen before in a really, really new angle, which I enjoy. So overall, giving that 4 stars, and that is number 2. Moving on to number 1, which is Uncanny Valley issue 2. Man, this book continues to surprise me, because issue 1 I thought was really solid. I'm like, all right, we're introing this idea of this half cartoon kid whose parents and grandparents, or at least the mom, is a cartoon. You're like, okay, how does that work? And usually issue 2s, after a really good issue 1, kind of flops a little. It's more of like, here's point A to point B, we have to get to this moment. And this book is actually better than issue 1, which I already really liked issue 1, because it explains the mythos of how these cartoons work without it feeling like exposition. It feels like character work, where we get to see the grandfather and the grandchild talk to each other. You get little glimpses of the mom and what she's up to trying to find her kid. And then you just get all the rules of how these cartoons work, of how he has powers, how these powers work, how people see them as cartoons, all while you also get some really interesting references of old school cartoons and even like He-Man style cartoon in the end. And it really works with the different styles in the artwork as well, where you get this normal looking kid with the really, really cartoony 60s vibe, Hanna-Barbera vibe, and then the more 80s vibe by the end. So I really loved it. It's a really great book, and it gets me very excited to see where the next issue is going to go. So overall, going to give that 4.5 stars, and that is my pick of the week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno. Let me know in the comments below what your pick of the week was. And last week's viewer pick of the week was Giant Size X-Men, and here are some comments about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno, and I'll see you guys in the next one.